Hi, so in this video I will give a quick introduction into what we mean by substitute goods. And this is another factor which shifts our demand curve, as I mentioned in a previous video. So substitute goods, very simply, are just two goods which are alternatives to each other. So one good can substitute for another good either perfectly or imperfectly. So what this means is that an increase in the price of one good will increase the demand for the other good, and what we call this is competitive demand. So I've got a few examples just to give a more concrete understanding of this. So we may have beer and wine as two different types of drinks that we could consume, and so we are going to tend to consume one of these or the other. We are going to consume beer or wine. So if we consider that we increase the price of beer, so we increase price of beer, actually I don't need to write this as I've already written it down here. We increase the price of beer, this is going to decrease the demand for beer. So if we have our demand curve, we have price and quantity, we have a downward sloping demand curve. We could say we are initially at this point here, P1, Q1, we have price 1 and the demand is Q1, and let's say for whatever reason the price of beer increases up to P2. Well, clearly we see that the demand is going to fall as we have a downward sloping demand curve. A higher price means we demand less. So that's what it says there, demand for beer falls. When we now think of substitute goods, we are thinking about a different market, the market for wine. And as such, the demand for wine is going to increase because the price of its substitute has increased. So we can now draw up the demand curve for wine. And this is a completely different demand curve, so we can put D wine, and maybe I should have put a B on the demand curve for beer, but we're now looking at wine, so I'll superscript that with a W. And because the demand for beer has fallen, and because the price of beer has increased, we could shift out our demand for wine, like so, to DW1. Because the price of a substitute is increased, beer is relatively more expensive, so people want to buy wine instead, and this shifts out the demand curve. So if our price of wine was at P1, we initially would have had this quantity 1 being demanded, but now we have a shift in the demand, and so our demand for wine actually increases to Q2, and this is what we know as competitive demand. So that's just a quick introduction into what we think about with substitutes, and it is a topic for a future video as to how I did hint at it. We could have perfect substitutes or imperfect substitutes, because if beer and wine are really good close substitutes and people go, okay, I'm going to consume whatever's cheaper of beer or wine, say on the drinks menu, well, this shift in demand may be very big, because people go, okay, the price of beer has increased, so now I definitely want to consume wine. However, with imperfect substitutes, some people may go, okay, the price of wine has increased, but I still much prefer wine to beer, so I'm going to continue to consume it, and so this increase in wine demand may be less, but I'll go into more detail on that in the future. But this was just a brief introduction, and know that there is plenty more to this topic to discuss. But if this video was at all useful, please do drop a like, make sure to subscribe for some more econ in your newsfeed, and check out the playlist for more introductory economics.